And today we are going to kick off the new year with some experts with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to learn about spotted lanternfly, zigzag sawfly, box tree moth, and beech leaf disease. And these are species that are not yet considered to be well established in the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario region, as well as in other parts of New York State. And because these species are now believed to be widespread, we do have an advantage to prevent their spread and even eradicate populations if we can detect their presence early. So it is our hope that you will take the information that you learned today and assist early detection efforts in the SLELO region and beyond. Continuing education credits will be awarded to those who want them and who stay for the entire webinar. A poll will be given at the end to collect your credentials and confirm your presence. Below is a list of the credits, and I will submit the attendance for SAF and ISA credits. And to collect the Master Naturalist credits, you can self-report at the New York Master Naturalist Program website. And this webinar is hosted by the St. Lawrence Eastern Lake Ontario Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, or SLELO PRISM for short. And we are one of the 8 PRISMs that span the state of New York, creating a network of partnerships as an integrative approach to invasive species management. The PRISM network is funded by the Environmental Protection Fund in coordination between the Department of Environmental Conservation and various host organizations. The boundaries of the SLELO PRISM include the 5 counties of Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and part of St. Lawrence. And this is the area that I'll often refer to as the SLELO region throughout this webinar. And SLELO PRISM is hosted by the Nature Conservancy, and we collaborate with our partners to protect our lands and waters from the impacts of invasive species. I'd like to invite Tom Allgaier, the Invasive Species Coordinator with the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, who's going to give us the latest update on the spotted lanternfly and the box tree moth. Tom, feel free to share your screen.
You should be seeing it now. You can
Yep.
hear me fine?
Perfect.
All right, perfect. As Megan said, I'm the Invasive Species Coordinator here at New York State Department of Agriculture Markets within the Division of Plant Industry. And jump right in. I hope all of you know what spotted lanternfly is and how long it's been here, where it came from, but I'll just do a quick little recap. It's native to China and Southeast Asia, areas like Vietnam, but it's also invasive in other parts of Asia like South Korea and India. It was first discovered in Pennsylvania in 2014 in Berks County, and it's slowly spread outward from there. It uses its mouth parts. It has piercing, sucking mouth parts. It uses those mouth parts to feed on the sap of various different plants, over 100 different species of plants, or its host. Its preferred host is tree of heaven, or Lanthus altissima, which is another invasive species. But it doesn't necessarily need that to survive. It can reproduce and survive and live to see another day, unfortunately, by feeding on other plants. The ones that we're concerned with most are grapes, apples, hops, maple trees, walnuts, and several others that are agricultural crops, primarily berries. Some of the impacts that we could see and we've seen in other states are vineyard losses. Nationally, New York ranks 3rd in grape production. Most people don't realize that. We have, a widespread and very robust grape production here in New York State, and we're doing our best to protect that, as well as orchards, particularly apples, also scattered throughout the state. And we rank 2nd in apple production, only 2nd to Washington State. For many years now, New York has been encouraging hop growers to return to growing hops in New York State, to supply some of our local not vineyards, but local breweries. And some of those crops are also being impacted or could be impacted. The environmental impacts The forest and forest products are really unknown at this time, but the potential is certainly there. Vineyard losses are our highest concern, followed by orchards, as I mentioned. But the impacts to forest products are we really don't know what the impacts are going to be. It'll probably be several years before we see any data on that. Mostly it's due to forest regeneration and sapling production. Where is spotted lanternfly now? Well, it's in 17 different states. However, it's not the entire state, as you can see here from the map from Cornell IPM, Integrated Pest Management. This map was updated November 9th. It will likely be updated, probably won't be updated again this year, but I suspect that later on in 2024 it will be. Illinois and Tennessee are the ones that were most recently added. Focusing on just New York, the first detection was in 2020. At this point, we're in 23 counties that were confirmed. There was a sighting in Rensselaer County at a state park. However, no official sample has been taken. So it is likely there's a population there as well. So we don't know what 2024 will bring, but likely continued spread. And all we can really hope for at this point is slowing the spread. The life cycle is such that it overwinters as an egg. So right now, this time of year, it's still out there, although it's not moving around unless people are moving the objects the egg masses are on. So the egg masses can be found this time of year. Typically, they're going to look more like the photo all the way to the left, kind of weathered and gray, and cracking looks almost like putty or clay, or dried sap. When they're first laid, they're quite white, and they kind of within a very short period of time turn like a glossy gray. But there's a percentage, probably about 40% of the egg masses are not covered, so they look similar to sesame seeds, glued little lines on a tree. There's about 40 to 60 eggs per egg mass, and each female can lay multiple egg masses. In the spring, May through the middle of the summer, those egg masses hatch and emerge the first instars, or the first nymphs. There are 4 instar nymphs. The fourth one is the center photo there with the red wing pads. You'll start to see those later in the summer, early into the fall. And then when they do molt the 6th time, they emerge as an adult. And then breeding begins later in the fall. As I mentioned, currently we're in this period of time here, January kind of heading into February, where really all we're going to see is egg masses. You might find some dead adults laying around and leaf litter, things like that, but that's very unlikely. Primarily, we're just going to see the egg masses. Now, if you could see that second photo down on the left, the early instar nymph, the little object that it's perched on getting ready to hop from is a spruce needle. So that gives you some idea of scale, how tiny they are when they first emerge. So their preferred host is tree of heaven, as I mentioned, which is also native to central China and Taiwan. They can tolerate poor soils. They can grow pretty much anywhere, like cracks in concrete. They are often found in disturbed sites, construction areas, roadsides, areas that were disturbed, and kind of construction areas around the edges of parking lots, rail lines, electrical transmission line areas, places that are not manicured and not heavily forested. They crowd out native species with dense growth and shading. They change soil composition through nutrient cycling and also allelopathic compounds that prohibit other plants' seeds from germinating rather. They can cause damage to buildings and roots, the buildings and sidewalks with their roots. They're quite fast growing, and they can cause cracking and damage to foundations and roadways and sidewalks, things like that. So even though it's like a 2-for-1 invasive species here. Going back to the eggs, as I mentioned, some of them are uncovered, some of them are covered. The female can lay multiple egg masses. Here you can see how well camouflaged it is on the bark of tree of heaven. Tree of heaven has that cantaloupe texture to the bark, and the egg masses and coloring and texture blend very easily in with the bark of tree of heaven. Although they don't necessarily always lay their eggs on tree of heaven, they will lay their eggs on anything outdoors that's exposed to the environment. Here's a couple examples of that. Tractor trailer, light housing. There's nothing from the top view, but when you look from the bottom, you'll see multiple egg masses. And then also along this rail line, one of the detector dogs from one of the other prisons, Lower Hudson Prison, one of their conservation detector dogs spotted this egg mass on the bottom of a rail line. So they, for whatever reason, they are attracted to laying eggs on rusty metal. So you can also often find them in those locations. Here's a camp chair that was laying flat on the ground. When someone picked up the chair just to inspect for egg masses, they found quite a few. But when it was laying flat on the ground, nothing was found. They have a tendency to lay eggs in protected sites. As you can see here, all three of these photos were underneath an object where they're protected from the weather and sunlight and things like that, and predators. Not that there's a lot of predators for the egg masses. When they first emerge, they're white, almost translucent. Within just a few minutes, they harden off their chitinous exoskeleton and they darken up. Many insects have this habit. And you can see on the right just how tiny they are on the bark of this tree. They're still clustered together, and what they'll do from that point is they'll seek a high point, whether it's a building, a power transmission line, a tree, and anything that they can crawl up that's tall, and then they will release, kind of jump off because they are tree hoppers. They will hop off into the wind and kind of disperse themselves that way. Once they hatch, unless you get them right away, when you can see here they're hatching out of the egg mass. But once they disperse themselves, the first, second instars are very difficult to find in the environment because they're so tiny, tick-like. So as they start to mature, when they're young, they'll feed on the tender growth of. They're very indiscriminate. They'll feed on the tender growth of most anything. Here you can see them on some ailanthus. However, if there's black walnut and ailanthus around at this life stage, they'll actually gravitate more towards the black walnut, especially if those trees are young and tender, 3-4 feet tall, very, very tender, lush growth in the spring. And then as they mature, they move to more selective hosts, and they prefer, you'll find them on trees with thicker bark, as you can see here on this ailanthus on the right. It was taken later in the season. You can see the thicker bark and the later instar nymphs feeding on that. This was a really cool shot, I thought, of a fourth instar nymph molting. It's probably the only photo I've ever seen of that occurring. So it was on this plant and it was feeding, and then when it got ready to molt, it attached itself to the stem, and the new fourth instar nymph has not hardened off yet, so it's got that pinkish glossy color to it. It just exited the third instar exoskeleton, and it's waiting to harden off its chitinous exoskeleton before it moves on. Later in the season, you'll often see adults mixed with multiple stages, particularly fourth instar nymphs. So you're not looking for one particular insect. It's not always the adult you're looking for. It can often be, these brightly colored, beautiful but destructive fourth instar nymphs. The adults are often pictured as spread out, excuse me, looking like a moth or a butterfly. However, that's not really the case. You're more likely to see a photo, not a photo. You're more likely to see the insect as it is in the photo to the right, from the lateral view. The inner wings are folded. You can barely see the reddish color there. They're kind of the forewings are kind of translucent, so it gives a little bit of a pinkish gray hue to them. Here's another example of some of the nymphs that are still alive towards the end of the season, right up towards, say September. You'll still see fourth instar nymphs mixed in with adults. When the females do finally mate, when the females become gravid and they're full of eggs, their abdomens swell and these yellow markings appear. Excuse me. This will only appear on the females. The one in the bag is quite gravid. She's ready, really. I mean, she's full. Where the one on the right still has some pleats showing, and either she had already laid some eggs, or she's still developing her eggs. But the yellow markings are definitely indicative of a female that has been mated and ready to lay eggs. So these were good captures because they stopped these two females from laying many, many eggs. Some indicators that spotted lanternfly is in the area. Sooty mold, which anyone that's familiar with growing roses is probably familiar with sooty mold from aphids, and as aphids and plant hoppers are somewhat related, and they both produce honeydew, you get the same blooms of sooty mold on anything that's below where they're feeding. So in this case, it would be a sidewalk that they were cleaning off, but this could also be cars, patio furniture, your barbecue grill, any outdoor equipment, anything exposed outside will get covered in honeydew, which is their excrement. It's a sugary sweet substance that that black sooty mold has a tendency to grow on. That can also lead to fungal growth, as you can see here on the base of this tree. There's a bunch of adults kind of gathering. They're not necessarily causing that fungal growth, but it's the honeydew and all the sap dripping down. That sweet sap also attracts stinging insects. As you can see here, there's a yellow jacket in this bottom photo here. European hornets, yellow jackets, things like that. Even honeybees are attracted to the sooty mold, to the honeydew. So if you see swarms of insects, particularly in the fall, fungal growth, black sooty mold, these are all indicators that even if you're not seeing the actual spotted lanternfly, that they could be in the area. Some of the impacts are, as I mentioned, kind of a nuisance thing. You can see these 3 steps here, or the patio steps. The bottom step has been power washed, the other one wasn't. So the other one is slick and wet, nasty, and just covered in black sooty mold. So you could see we're being a slip, trip, and fall hazard. It makes it very difficult to enjoy your back patio if it's covered in insect poo. And the smell, the photo on the top right will give off like a fermented alcohol type smell as the fungal pathogen starts to grow on the sooty mold and the honeydew. So you'll get that fermented alcohol, almost like old apples. If you're familiar with apple drops in an orchard, you get that slight alcohol fermenting smell. You'll get that as well. It inhibits the photosynthesis of plants. So here on these grape leaves, you can see the black sooty mold covering the plant, very much like I mentioned, people that grow roses, same effect. It really diminishes the plant's ability to produce its own food. And the same thing with this clothesline. You could see the honeydew just dripping down the post and making a mess on the ground there. So it's unsightly. It's more of a nuisance pest in urban and suburban areas, but it does certainly impact the quality of outdoor activities. And how you can help? The best ways to report it are through the reporting tool. You can either use the QR code here on the right, but we also have the spotted lanternfly at agriculture.ny.gov reporting mechanism, and basically asks you to upload a few photos. Those are really, really important. If you can include something for scale, like a pen or a coin, that's very helpful. It's also important to note the location, because sometimes when you're uploading it, it'll upload one location where you actually saw it at another location. So it's very important to include those locations marked in the report. Another way is through IMAP Invasives, and there'll be more on that later on. But IMAP Invasives is the New York State invasive species database. So any invasive species can be reported there, not just spotted lanternfly. And there are trainings on the IMAP Invasives website. Jumping on over to box tree moth. So if anyone has any questions, just drop them into the chat. So box tree moth is, again, native to Asia. It has spread to Europe. In Europe, there are forests of native box trees. Here we grow them as an ornamental boxwood plantings. They're often found at historic plantings. Here you can see our horticulture inspector Jamie Lynn Woodside at a cemetery. So they're very common in cemeteries, libraries, public buildings, courthouses, manicured landscapes, public gardens, even private homes as well. But typically, private homes have much smaller scale plantings. They're slow growing. So being slow growing, they're especially when they get, say, 50, 100 years old, these plants are highly valued because they are slow growing. So in 2018, box tree moth was first detected in Ontario, Canada. As many of our recent pests to New York, invasive species were first found in Canada, and then they've migrated south to the States. We use it as a CAPS target in 2019 rather. CAPS is our Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey. It's a cooperative program with the USDA. All states carry out a CAPS survey. It was one of our target species that we didn't have here in New York that we were looking for, hoping that it wasn't here. We targeted it in 2019 and found nothing. We did some targeting trapping, even though it wasn't part of the CAPS program, but we targeted some high-risk areas or areas that we thought were high risk in 2020. And then it was found in Niagara County in 2021, where it likely had flown over the border. One thing I want to mention before I move on is what Jamie Lynn here is looking at is, you can see the brown desiccated plant. So that's the sort of defoliation damage that box tree moth can cause in a very short period of time. The pupa stage is very difficult to find, especially after a heavy feeding like this. You can see the pupa in her hand in the picture below and circles above. It looks almost seed-like, very, very hard to detect on the plant. They will drop off into the soil, and they're harder to even find there. The larval stage, the caterpillar stage, is pictured here on the left. They're approximately an inch long with a black head. They'll do intervanal feeding, as you can see here in this photo. They'll leave the midrib and the outer edge of the leaf because it's a little more fibrous. That's the first generation. When the second generation hatches out and that's all they find to eat, they will eat that. They will eat the bark off these small stems. They will just continue to kind of scale up and eat what they can off the plant. So the first generation will cause quite a bit of damage. The second generation is likely to kill the plant once they start girdling the plant. They can refoliate from a heavy defoliation feeding, but they're not going to recover from, plants will not recover from being girdled at that point. Typically the plant is lost. All life stages were found in traps and visual surveys in 2021. There were 2 generations found. All those detections at that time were in Niagara County. Additional trapping in surrounding counties continued, and unfortunately found that it had spread. In December of 2021, we being New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, put a quarantine in place to prohibit the movement of box tree moth from outside the quarantine as a regulatory measure to reduce the spread of this particular invasive species. In March of the following year, USDA kind of mirrored our 3-county quarantine. And then later that spring, USDA also imposed a federal order prohibiting the import of Ilex, Buxus, and Euonymus. So it's holly, box tree, and Euonymus from Canada. Holly and Euonymus are described as host plants in Europe, and its native Asia. However, in the United States and Europe, it's never been found on these. We don't have any native forests of boxwood or buxus. We have ornamental plantings. However, there are of cultural significance and high value, high dollar, impacts to replace some of those plants. Sometimes impossible. But we do have native hollies. So that's a concern as far as environmental impacts and cultural impacts and financial impacts. Later this year, back in September, we expanded our quarantine to add additional counties. Now there's 5 counties. I'll show a map in a little bit. The adults are found primarily at night, so you're not likely to find the adults. You're more likely to find the caterpillar stage, the larval stage. One thing I want to mention about the larval stage, very interesting for this insect, it's the larval stage that overwinters, which is very odd, even in cold weather, even in areas like Buffalo. It has no problem surviving. It goes into a diapause or a rest stage, and it will overwinter as a larval stage, and then continue on the next year. Adults, as I mentioned, are found primarily at night. However, they can be detected during the day occasionally, but most active at night, and also found in traps. One distinctive mark that kind of sets these off some other nondescript white moths are these little apostrophes on the wings that the arrows are pointing to. There's both a light and a dark morph. These are the same insects, not males and females. It's just a different color variation. However, the black morph has never been found in North America. The egg masses are quite small. So this is the underside of a leaf from a boxwood. A boxwood leaf is about the size of your pinky nail. So you can imagine how small the egg masses are. Very difficult to find. We've had up to 3 generations of box tree moth here in New York. They can have the potential to have many more. I believe up to 7 in Europe, in Southern Europe, Southern France. It's very difficult to detect due to the placement of the egg masses on the underside of leaves and the size of the leaves. But a diligent survey, you can certainly detect the egg masses. Currently, it's known to be in 4 states. We're kind of in the center. The shipment the location of Massachusetts was likely an accidental introduction of plants that came over from Canada, as well as Michigan and southwestern Pennsylvania. Where the star is marked in New York is not the location. It's just denoting New York. That star should probably be further west towards Buffalo, on the lake shore, and it's continuing to spread east along the lake shore, along Lake Ontario. It started in Niagara and then kind of migrated to Orleans, Monroe, Wayne, and it's likely in Oswego County at this point. Trapping for box tree moth around registered establishments is required within the quarantine, and additional trapping is conducted outside the quarantine area to monitor for its spread. It's one of the ways, besides visual surveys, that we've been able to monitor its spread. And in 2023, there was kind of exponential spread. Here you can see a box tree of a boxwood planting that's had some defoliation. You can see the bottom left, especially part of the plant isn't really affected as much as the top and upper right, but still pretty heavily defoliated. And you can see our bucket trap there in the back, and the kill strip in the screen, and several adults in the trap. This is what it can do to a historic ornamental planting of boxwood. You're looking at thousands of dollars worth of damage. Those relatively large, those aren't huge, but they're relatively large boxwoods have a great economic value because they're so slow growing. To replace these plants would take years and years, decades. Old boxwood plantings can succumb within weeks if gone undetected. By the second generation, as I mentioned, box tree moth will girdle the stems and cause death of the plant. So New York State Agri Markets works with nursery growers and plant dealer establishments to kind of limit the accidental human spread of box tree moth through the sale of host material. So we inspect that host material, we trap for it, and then we also limit the shipment from the quarantine out of the quarantine through our regulatory authority. The state also requires inspection by us, our department, of host material grown in or removed from the quarantine area that's being offered for sale. So the current quarantine are these 5 counties, 6 counties? 4, yeah, 6 counties, sorry. However, additional counties are being considered as we move east from Wayne County, as I mentioned. Oswego will probably, as we kind of go along the shore of the lake, if it's following the predicted pathway, it's definitely moving towards the SLELO PRISM. For reporting, we have this wonderful roll off your tongue reporting tool. It's an ArcGIS survey form, just like the box spotted lanternfly form. However, this one just has a ArcGIS kind of nondescript name. But we can use that reporting tool, and again, uploading photos and descriptions as far as the location and things like that. And then also, I have a link here for the box tree regulations, which would only affect folks in the quarantine area. So currently, there are no regulations within the SLELO region, but in the spring, that will, before the spring probably, sometime this winter, the regulations will probably be amended once again to add additional counties. And not all the counties have positive finds. There was originally a buffer around Niagara County, and it was later found in Erie and Orleans County. So just because the county is in the quarantine doesn't mean that necessarily that county is infested. We do include a buffer. That kind of wraps up what I have.
Thank you so much, Tom. Somebody did ask a question in the Q&A box. I answered it, but feel free to add more to the answer if you like there, Tom, or anybody else who wants to help with that question. And next, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Maria Moscoli, the Forest Health Specialist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, who's going to speak with us about beech leaf disease.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. Okay, looks good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Maria Moscoli here from DEC Forest Health. Today, I'm going to give you a brief history of beech leaf disease, go over some of the research, and show you how to identify it and its lookalikes. The importance of American beech. American beech trees are an important component of the northern hardwood forest type, which makes up more than half of the forested land in New York. Wildlife rely on beech nuts as a main source of energy due to their high protein and fat content. Beech trees in New York have been in decline from beech bark disease since the 1960s, and now beech leaf disease is the latest threat. BLD causes severe decline in beech trees of all age classes, with higher disease severity found in younger trees. Loss of beech would cause changes in forest structure that would affect the whole ecosystem. Unfortunately, the forecast does not look good for beech trees. Beech leaf disease is spreading rapidly, as you can see in this map here. In North America, beech leaf disease was first found in Ohio in 2012. It has been observed spreading outward from there since. In New York, beech leaf disease has been found on American beech, European beech, and Oriental beech. Symptoms progress quickly over the years, and there is still much unknown. It is unknown how the disease spreads. Birds and wind are considered the most likely theories so far. In New York, DEC Forest Health first started hearing reports of striping on leaves and thinning beech canopies in 2017. We started tracking it as beech leaf disease the following year in 2018. At that time, the only detections were in the most southwestern part of the state. Each year since, we've seen a significant expansion of the disease range. This year, we found beech leaf disease in 11 new counties. You can see in this map here all the positive towns found in New York as of July 2023, as well as the towns previously surveyed where it wasn't found. There were also a few unsure locations which will be resurveyed next year. This map gives a more detailed representation of the spread versus the county map. Note that this is cumulative data and not all of these towns were surveyed in this past year. Since beech leaf disease has only recently been recognized, its biology and vectors are not well understood. There is still much unknown and research is ongoing. Research by CARTA found that the foliar nematode Littleanchus crenati mccanii causes beech leaf disease symptoms. It is unknown whether the nematode is the full cause of the damage or if it is associated with another pathogen such as a fungus, bacteria, or virus. Research by McIntyre found that the symptoms associated with BLD are shown to influence leaf gas exchange and physiological leaf traits that are linked to carbon assimilation capacity. Implications of these results point toward a compromised tree carbon budget, which can negatively affect growth, vigor, and long-term survival. So the dark striping on the leaves is considered a gall, and it is affecting photosynthesis. For the annual BLD visual survey, beech trees are examined for symptoms of beech leaf disease and tallied as positive or negative. Severity of symptoms is then ranked. All of the positive and negative survey results from 2023 can be seen in this map here. We also get a lot of IMAP submissions, but those are not included in this particular map. Tracking local spread of beech leaf disease. DEC Forest Health is working on a small study to track the local spread of beech leaf disease in the forest. In 1 year, the area of symptomatic trees expanded from about an acre to 4.6 acres. And then the following year, it expanded to 15 acres, and there was larger expansion downhill. In addition, there were several outlier populations of 1 or 2 symptomatic trees found up to half a mile away. So basically, the area of visible infestation more than tripled each year in the first few years, and then showed some outlier jumps of a few trees further out. I expected about the same this year, with the outlier jumps expanding in a similar way to the core infestation. But that's not what happened. Instead, we saw a crazy amount of visible expansion. Instead of each outlier population slowly expanding, this whole area of previously asymptomatic trees just filled in since last year. The infestation seems to have spread more quickly to the east and overall downhill. This is a very small study, and there are many variables to take into consideration, as well as many factors still unknown about beech leaf disease itself, including how it spreads. Changes in forest structure. A network of monitoring plots was established to assess the symptom progression of beech leaf disease and the change in stand characteristics as this disease progresses. The 2019 plot data was used in a multi-state analysis showing the extent to which beech leaf disease, beech scale, and beech bark disease are established in forests surrounding the Great Lakes. Changes in forest structure and composition are expected. Unfortunately, if left unmanaged, invasive species such as buckthorn, honeysuckle, barberry, etc., have the potential to fill in the gaps left by declining beech. Restoration work will have to include invasive species removal. So far, there are some encouraging preliminary results from this study on polyphosphite. Beech saplings were treated with polyphosphite 30 by soil drench twice a year for 5 years. Treated trees are much healthier than untreated trees. They have fuller canopies, more asymptomatic leaves, and 5 times fewer nematodes. They expanded the study to mature trees a couple of years ago, but will likely not have results for several more years. So basically, they did this study on very small saplings and did see some promising results, but are now doing the study on more mature trees to see if they have the same promising results. And then as far as other treatments, can BLD be managed by pesticides? Well, research is ongoing. There are a few products available to treat BLD in New York. You can hire a tree care company to apply them. However, nothing has yet been proven effective, so they may or may not be a waste of money. So that is the part that's ongoing. Like, there are products that are approved and labeled for usage, but the research is ongoing on whether they are actually effective. At this time, it's seeming like amomectin benzoate is turning out to not be very effective, unfortunately. That was the previous one that some tree care companies were using. Studies are now focusing on broad form, which has been shown to kill nematodes. So that's what the new studies are researching. And DEC Forest Health is conducting silvicultural research in cooperation with the Forest Service to look for better ways to manage beech forests to minimize impacts of BLD. So now I am going to be going over what you need to know to survey. The ideal survey time is late May through October. Here you can see the banding at leaf out, and again it's still there in the fall. Here is the really important part. I need good, clear photos of the banding in order to confirm the reports. Neither of these photos shows me clear evidence of beech leaf disease, and I would have to mark it insufficient to confirm. So I can only mark it positive if I see that really good, clear banding. Otherwise, I just don't know what to do with it. Photos should be taken upward through the light, showing the banding. Also, please, 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 only submit 1 point per area. We don't need individual trees submitted. If you're walking down a really long trail and end up far from where you started, maybe you could submit a point at the beginning and the end, and that would be fine. But like, we don't really need like multiple like points per area. 1 per area is sufficient. Okay. So the first thing you're going to need to know is how to identify beech. Beech trees naturally have smooth gray bark, though they can often have beech bark disease, which will make the bark bumpy, and also they're frequently carved into in public places. Beech leaves are simple and ovate in shape, and they have teeth. Each vein ends in a tooth. The leaves are not hairy or sandpapery. Here you can see a comparison between Eastern hophornbeam and American beech. You can see here how on the Eastern hophornbeam, each vein does not end in a tooth and there are many more teeth. The main symptoms to look for is the dark striping between the veins of the leaves. This is most visible looking up into the canopy. Later, heavy banding can cover most of the leaf surface. This will impact the tree's ability to photosynthesize. After a few years of being infested, leaves will become deformed, chlorotic, and have a thickened, leathery texture. Symptoms of BLD generally progress from the bottom of the canopy upward, but can be found unevenly distributed throughout the canopy. Likewise, it is found in the understory before the overstory. Damage from BLD occurs in the buds, and if the damage to the buds is severe, leaves may not flush out in the spring. Thinning of the canopy happens over time due to early leaf drop and aborted bud development. Beech may reflush leaves in late July to replace heavily symptomatic leaves. New flush of leaves does not necessarily show the symptoms. BLD symptoms are variable, so I am now going to show you several more examples of the symptoms as well as other beech problem lookalikes you can encounter. Here you can see some examples of light to moderate banding. The dark striping on the leaves is most visible looking upward through the light. Here are a few more good, clear photos of the dark banding. Okay, so why hold leaves up to the light? Here's a really good example. These are the same leaves. The first photo is taken looking down, and you can see how it's unclear whether beech leaf disease is present. I would not if I just saw this photo, it is not clear enough to me saying that this is beech leaf disease, and I would still have to mark this insufficient to confirm. But then these very same leaves upward through the light, and there it is, the really clear banding, and that's definitely beech leaf disease. So you can see how just on the same leaves, just the angle in which you take the picture really makes a big difference. Okay, so here's a practice to see if you can spot the BLD symptoms in the photo. These are easier than some that I get, because I understand sometimes you're just at the bottom of the tree and you have to take a picture up and it's tiny, but I'll try to zoom in and look for those bands like as much as I can. And then you can see. There, okay. So let's see. Excuse me. Okay, so now for the heavy symptoms. Heavily infested leaves are shrunken, curled, and leathery in texture. Symptoms progress to puckering, curling, chlorosis, and necrosis. At the latest stages, leaves will be deformed, leathery, and possibly shrunken. Okay, so now I'm going to go over some other problems that you might encounter on beech, including erinium patches, aphid damage, and anthracnose. Symptoms are also very variable on these issues and can look very similar to BLD in some cases. And remember, it's always better to report even when unsure and make sure to get good, clear photos. The first lookalike that might be confused with BLD is the erinium patch caused by Eriophid mites. And this is very common. You are very likely to see this. It is similar to BLD in that the damage is a gall, which is the tree's response to the organism. Oh, and let me just say that these other problems, they are very common, but they don't get out of control and cause like major damage like these other things that we're looking for. These are just regular tree problems that the trees have evolved along with and can deal with, and it's just regular and doesn't cause like major damage or anything. For the erinium patch, there will be a felt-like area on the surface of the leaf, and there might be some puckering on the other side. And most of the time I see light spotting, but in more cases there can be some striping. BLD doesn't have that felt-like patch, and the thickened area takes up the entirety between the veins. The next lookalike is aphid damage. This is also very common. Aphids will cause a lighter banding versus the dark banding on beech leaf disease. Aphids. You can see here the aphid curls are much tighter curl on that part of the leaf, whereas BLD curls are an overall distortion of the whole leaf curling. Also, if you look closely at the back of an aphid leaf and an aphid damaged leaf, you might see some old aphid casings. You can see in this last photo of BLD how difficult it can be to identify from the top down. The chlorosis could be confused with the aphid stippling. And the final lookalike we're going to go over is anthracnose, which on beech leaves looks like patches of necrotic tissue, usually on the end with a tip, but it could be toward the side. And here is anthracnose versus beech leaf disease. The BLD necrotic tissue can be areas along the side or striping. And then here's just some pictures of Japanese beetle feeding damage. Okay, so management prevention. Treatments are being researched, but unfortunately nothing has been proven effective at stopping BLD yet. DEC Forest Health staff are cleaning their boots with a boot brush and Lysol in an attempt to prevent spread. So that's just something we do because we go from one beech stand to another. So especially if we are in an infested stand and we know we're going to go to like another beech stand, then we're just like taking every preventative caution that we can. And then, oh yeah, and don't move soil and leaf matter and firewood. Okay, so here's the sources that I've cited and taken photos from. For more information, visit the DEC BLD webpage, which is currently under construction. The whole DEC webpage is under construction, and so we actually haven't been able to update it since last year. But once we're able to update it, we will add back in the most recent maps and pictures and everything, which hopefully that should happen soon. And you can also get this BLD flyer on the webpage, or reach out to me or Megan. So this is a flyer we put together. And then remember, report BLD in New York by submitting through IMAP Invasives. And if you have questions about tree problems, you can email foresthealth@dec.ny.gov. And then questions, but I think we are saving our questions to the end.
You can answer them
Or I
in
can answer them?
in the
Okay.
Q&A box, just,
Okay.
type a response to the few questions that are in there.
Should I type them or should I say
Yeah,
them
you can
out
type
loud?
them. You can
Okay,
just type them in there.
okay. So then should I just stop sharing then?
Yeah, you can stop sharing now.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Maria,
Okay,
for the
of course.
information. It was very helpful.
Excellent.
Okay. And now I'd like to welcome Liam Summers, entomologist and with the Forest Health Diagnostic Lab with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, to join us. They're going to give us some updates on the elm zigzag sawfly.
Screen here.
Looks great.
All right, awesome. Hi, everybody. Like Megan mentioned, my name is Liam Summers, and I'm an entomologist for the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I will be talking about elm zigzag sawfly in New York State. I'll start with a little bit of background. Like most of our pests here, it's native to Eastern Asia. It has since spread throughout a good portion of Europe since 2003. I believe it's been found in over 19 European countries by now, where they found to have 4 to 6 generations a year. So it does reproduce very quickly. But it wasn't found in North America until 2020 in Quebec, Canada, through an iNaturalist submission. I've clipped that actual submission here on the right-hand side. And as you can see, all you really need is that clear zigzag pattern on an elm leaf to confirm its identity. I believe they went back and actually collected specimens just to, do their due diligence. But that was how it was found. Just shows the importance of reporting. But since that detection, it's been found through a lot of the East Coast. The first one in the United States being Virginia, and just a few months ago, Massachusetts being added to that list. We did find a pretty suspicious bug guide submission for 2018 that looked a lot like an adult zigzag sawfly, just kind of showing that it was probably here before we knew, but we just didn't really know what we were looking at or what to look for. But since that detection in Canada and sending out the alert to all these other states, it's just been found throughout most states on the east side. And I would expect more states to being added to this list as time goes on. So elm zigzag sawfly is a defoliator. It does have potential to cause severe defoliation damage, like you can see on this tree on the right-hand side. This was the very first detection in North Carolina. You can see it's almost worked its way all the way up to the top of the crown there, just eating every leaf on the tree. And the photo to the right of that is actually after they did an insecticidal application. And just kind of showing a little scope of how many, insects are on that tree. We didn't believe it at first. It was pretty crazy, that photo, but that is real from that initial detection. But in Europe, one of their main issues is that it's outcompeting some of their native species that rely on elm as a food source. I believe there's like 2 threatened moth species and a threatened butterfly species that they're pretty worried about. It's unclear if that could be the same problem here. There's not a whole lot of insects that necessarily rely specifically on elm just because of how little elm we have in the state, thanks to Dutch elm disease. But this is just another one of those added layers of stress onto an already decimated tree. I should note that zigzag sawfly will feed on, or is believed to feed on, all species of elm. They seem to favor Siberian elm over most, but they have been feeding on most species, and it's believed to feed on all species. So some of the life cycle and identification, I would not expect anybody to find any of these eggs. They're extremely small and almost look like a drop of rain on the edge of a leaf. They're under a millimeter long and under a millimeter wide, so very small. They'll be in this egg stage for about 4 to 8 days, and there'll be 7 to 49 eggs along the serrated edge of the elm leaves. So they can really pack it in there in a small amount of room. And the larva, this is probably the most easily identifiable life stage, and probably the most common one. Definitely the most long-lived in terms of days in a life stage is the larval stage. They do range in size quite a bit, being from under 2 millimeters in length, which is extremely small, up to a little over a centimeter long. And they both have to have the black T markings and the band across the eye to confirm the identity. So you can see on that bottom picture there, it's pretty clear to see those black T, capital T shaped markings on the second and third pair of legs. And sometimes the black band isn't always as clear, especially with some of the earlier instar larval stage. But it will have both of those, because there are sawfly larvae that will have just the black T markings on the legs or just the band on the eye. It needs both to be zigzag sawfly. And they will be in this life stage for 2 to 3 weeks generally. And the pupa, it is kind of a loosely woven meshy cocoon, usually on the underside of the leaves that they were feeding on beforehand. They'll usually be in the stage for about a week. And they do have an overwintering cocoon stage. I probably should have added a photo in here that looks a little bit different. It's a little thicker and kind of yellowish in color, not so see-through like these are. But those overwintering cocoons are usually in the leaf litter on the ground, and that's another thing I wouldn't really expect anybody to go out there and find that. And the adult, pretty inconspicuous fly. It's pretty small, 6 to 7 millimeters long. Not too many characteristic markings on the body, but it does have like a white patch on the underside of the thorax, and it does have these yellowish pale legs, but the rest of the body is completely black. And they're known to be very strong flyers that kind of aid to their spread. Really, they're able to fly up to 56 miles in a year, and sometimes even further in favorable wind currents. But they'll only be in the adult stage for 1 to 6 days, so pretty short-lived there. And this is generally what you will see in a quote-unquote infestation. I say that as we haven't really found any intense infestations in New York quite yet. Generally, it's just been a couple of feeding patterns on a couple of leaves per tree. But it is pretty clear. Like you can see on that left side, that's generally what we found, is maybe like one of those feeding patterns or two. But it is very characteristic of their presence because there is nothing else that will make that clear winding zigzag pattern on an elm leaf. There are other insects that do feed on elm leaves, but it won't make this clearly winding edge little feeding gallery, really. It's more just they'll just eat straight through the leaf, and it won't have that zigzag pattern. But In heavier infestations, it can eat all of the leaf tissue right down to the midrib, like you can see on the right-hand side here. In those cases, it can be pretty tricky to, I guess, like identify that they are there. But if they're eating that much of the leaf tissue, more than likely you'll be able to find a life stage and identify it from that. So here's what the elm distribution looks like in New York State. So not a whole lot there, really. And, you know, like I mentioned, thanks to Dutch elm disease, wiped out a good amount of our elm, except for just right outside that St. Lawrence area, right along the St. Lawrence Seaway. That definitely has our highest concentration of elm in the state. And that's where we focused a lot of our surveying efforts. We were contacted in 2021, like right at the beginning of the season, by the Canadian federal government to keep an eye out for zigzag sawfly. We went out there, did a bunch of surveying in the St. Lawrence area, just because that is where all that elm is, and we actually didn't find anything. So we went back in 2022. Tried to do a little bit more of a broad search, and we surveyed 12 different sites and found the New York's first detections up in Wilson Hill Wildlife Management Area, Lost Nation State Forest, and Brasher State Forest, which are all pretty close together. You can see those red dots there in the north end of St. Lawrence County. And those other white areas are other places that we surveyed and just didn't find it. So we're kind of thinking maybe it was contained up into that northern area, but wasn't really sure. It seemed like that might have been the case just because we were going to other very elm dense forests and just not finding anything. But on all the elm trees that we surveyed at those 3 positive sites, we estimated that it was around 10% of the trees had a feeding pattern on them. And again, like I mentioned, it was all very low feeding damage. So, you know, not a huge alarm. It was positive for finding it, but not any severe damage at that point. And up until June 30th of this past year, like I just mentioned, it's all been very light feeding damage. But a homeowner in Niskayuna got a hold of one of our foresters about something eating all the leaves on their elm trees. And you can see those top 2 photos there are from their backyard. Those are a bunch of elm trees that are missing almost all of their leaves outside of the top of that crown there. And our forester took a bunch of photos and sent it to me, and I couldn't believe it. It was elm zigzag sawfly, which is 150 miles south of that original detection. So kind of leading to the theory that it's probably a lot more widely distributed than we thought it would be. We had all life stages present there, so it's just, you know, kind of showing that it's perfectly happy being there in that huge cluster of elm trees, able to just stay on the same host, keep feeding, reproducing. But after this detection, we put out a bunch of outreach, some social media posts to encourage reporting. And this is basically what we got in just a few short months. You can see it's basically across most of the state there, really. Outside of the New York City, Long Island area, which I would expect to find it at some point soon. It does say there's an unconfirmed location down there in New York City area, or is that Nassau? That looks like Nassau County, which turned out to be not elm zigzag sawfly, so that should probably be removed from the map. But this is probably a little bit better representative map of what we were finding. So yes, it was across the state, but it's not like it was absolutely everywhere. You know, it wasn't causing that much damage. And outside of that Niskayuna detection, still very low feeding damage. One of the bigger concerns with zigzag sawfly is with urban elm. So like I mentioned in like the New York City area, how would I expect to see it show up? Elm is commonly used as like a street tree and an ornamental. which allows them to get really big. And zigzag sawfly seems to favor those really large mature trees because they don't have to go far, and it's able to provide like a food source and host to all of their life stages. They're able to just stay there, keep moving up the tree and defoliating. And like the instance on the right hand side here, where it's used as a street tree, it is very commonly used as like a street lining tree because they grow so tall and large, and they're just like a very attractive tree, really. And in those situations, if that does have zigzag sawfly, like I was saying, it doesn't have to go far. It's able to just move through that whole area, have plenty of food. It's just one of those situations where it would be easy to get out of hand there. But so far up to this point, management in New York specifically hasn't been necessary. There are plenty of insecticides that would work for the larval stage specifically, just because they're a soft-bodied insect. They're a lot more vulnerable to insecticides. But there are some like general use insecticides that would work for that larval stage. It is known that spinosad is like a very good sawfly larval insecticide. And Virginia has been doing a lot of research on different insecticidal applications on some of their infested elm. I know recently they're just doing some testing with dinotefuran, and it worked pretty effectively as a foliar application against that larval stage. But we continue to talk with what they're doing and just get some of the newest research and things that they're figuring out, because they have it a lot more abundant down there than we do, where they're able to set up this kind of research. But some of the research that we did this past year, we partnered with SUNY ESF with Melissa Furkey, who's the entomology professor at SUNY ESF. We are trying to pin down how many generations a year exist in New York State. We're able to figure out that they have asexual reproduction here, and trying not to get into the weeds too much, but trying to find some pathogens, predators, and parasitoids that might be impacting their population. These are some of the photos on the bottom side here. Some pathogens that are clearly impacting some of the EZS larvae. It does seem that there are things feeding on them, because there's been so many times where we've gone to a forest to look at a positive detection, and there's just no larva or any life stage to be found. You can see that there's those clear feeding patterns in the leaf tissue, but just nothing there. So it does seem like there are probably some natural enemies here in New York that would feed on them and lower their population. But we're just trying to track the damage severity. Like I've been saying, it's been pretty low in New York. We did a little track comparison study, which turned out to be the yellow sticky cards were the most effective at collecting them. We tried a couple different funnel traps and things for collecting the adults, and none of them really worked that well outside of the yellow sticky trap, which is pretty convenient because they're very cheap and easy to access, and they're just a simple tool, really. So that has been a great resource at collecting them, to just, count the abundance and figure out where they are. And we also have our multi-state working group that we collaborate with a few times a year. That's all of those states that I mentioned earlier that were on that map. We all just kind of bounce ideas off each other and see what the other states are seeing, just to kind of feel out what we can really expect in the future. And this is some of the results from the yellow sticky card trapping. This is just the first year of this data collection, so not too many recognizable trends at this time. You can see there is some kind of overlapping generations, but there will be, we will need a couple more years of this data collection to really hash things out and kind of figure out their phenology and just kind of fill in some of those knowledge gaps for us. But some of the things that we're looking forward to this year, we're going to establish some tree health plots. I believe we're probably going to go up to the St. Lawrence area, back to those 3 locations that we found it at, and just do some long-term health monitoring and damage severity of those areas, just to see how it progresses over time. And we're going to continue to collect specimens for Canada. They're doing some genetic research to determine whether or not a lot of our zigzag sawflies here are from the original point of origin in East Asia, or if they're the European variety. And, you know, just along with the continued outreach and the mapping and damage severity tracking, just to kind of fill in the whole picture here. So like I mentioned at the beginning, reporting is extremely important. Helps us with everything we do. If you see anything suspicious, feel free to send any photos or ask any questions to the Forest Health email account that I have listed there. Or better yet, make an IMAP invasive report, which goes directly to me either way, and I confirm all of those. Or you can just get a hold of me directly if you have any questions or anything you'd like to follow up on. And that's all I got.
Perfect. Thank you, Liam. Go ahead and check out the Q&A box and feel free to respond to any of the questions that you see in there showing up for you or otherwise. It's all very great information. So thank you to all of our presenters. So this next session, I'm just going to share how everyone can get involved in some early detection efforts for the species that we've covered today. And as mentioned, all the resources shared will be sent in a follow-up email for you as well. So to enhance early detection efforts in the SLELO region, we've actually established a volunteer surveillance network, or VSN, in which we recruit and train volunteers to survey for and report observations of priority invasive species to IMAP invasives. And our VSN efforts are focused on species that are thought to be in low abundance or that are not yet in our region, but are known to be present within close proximity to our boundaries, or there is a direct pathway in which they may spread to our region. So this approach helps us to detect the presence of invasive species before, hopefully before, they become too widespread to manage or eradicate. And the species listed on the slide are the priority species we're currently recruiting and training volunteers to recognize and report. But this list is subject to change as new species are discovered or as existing species become more widespread. So we do offer trainings, and the trainings last about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on needs. The training times are flexible and are dependent on your availability and are held via Zoom. And we cover general identification of the species. We provide survey tips similar to things that you saw today. And we also provide the training for IMAP invasives, their mobile app, and their desktop training. So you can sign up and learn more about these trainings on our website if you're interested. And again, I will send out a link to this in your follow-up. So many of you are likely familiar with these community science platforms, but I just wanted to share just a quick little bit about these apps for those of you who may be new to them, because they're very helpful tools that aid invasive species early detection efforts. So as mentioned multiple times, IMAP Invasives is New York's preferred invasive species database. You can report observations to be confirmed by experts like those that you've heard from today. And you can also use the data yourself to view the distribution of invasive species across the state, which is also really helpful. Like if you're wanting to go out surveying, you can, check IMAP Invasives and decide whether or not the area you're going to, what species maybe you could keep an eye out for. It's also used for treatment data, which is also really helpful for invasive species managers and others. And the data reported to IMAP, it notifies invasive species managers of new infestations, and it aids early detection and our management efforts. Another app that you can get involved in is iNaturalist. It's more of a forum and it allows you to share your photos of the species that you encounter with a network of people who can help with identification and who can also often answer questions about the species in question. And the data from iNaturalist is also shared into the IMAP invasives and can be filtered on their public map. And SLELO PRISM has special projects that you can join on both IMAP and iNaturalist. And lastly, Seek is an app by iNaturalist, and it uses AI technology to identify plants, animals, insects, and even fungi. And it also can provide information on whether or not a species is native, invasive, or introduced, which is pretty cool. And it has games and you can earn badges and things like that. So I will put links to these in your follow-up for you to learn more about them. And I just wanted to mention again, it's very important when reporting observations to any of the platforms to take very good photos that are clear and not blurry, because that's what the experts are going to be using to verify your observations. So on the left, there's some examples, of what to avoid, anything blurry or anything that's too far away to really zero in on what you're trying to show. And then the photos on the right are examples of good, clear photos. And also when possible, it's best to place something behind your specimen to provide a background, or something for scale. You could use your hand, piece of paper or something like that for background, or maybe like a pen or something, or a coin for scale. And that helps your camera focus as well. So to help showcase our priority species, we've collaborated with IMAP Invasives to develop a story map for our volunteer surveillance network. And at this time, we have the following focal species showcased in the story map, and we do have plans to add more. So each of the focal species has its own page with identifying characteristics, signs of symptoms or symptoms of infestation to watch for, and then it has that important IMAP invasive confirmed observation data in the map, and then suggested survey sites for our region, for the SLELO region, for you to look for the various species. The story map is housed on our website on the VSM webpage, and it can be used to help existing volunteers or also as a training tool for new volunteers. And the next few slides, I'm just going to showcase some of the suggested survey sites for the species that we've covered today. IMAP Invasives, in collaboration with the New York State DEC and Ag and Markets, have developed a statewide adopted grid square program where you can claim a specific area to monitor for spotted lanternfly and the preferred host tree of heaven. And this is just a screenshot of the program map with grid squares that are available in the SLELO region. As you can see, there are plenty of grid squares available there. So many of the sites are located at state parks or other public area sites, or maybe they're nearby highly probable areas like confirmed tree of heaven observations, or are near maybe like a vineyard or an orchard or another highly probable area that spotted lanternfly might show up. And you can learn more about this program on the NY-IMAP Invasives website and sign up to adopt any of these grid squares. So for box tree moth, so the observation data available for box tree moth and IMAP Invasives is limited, so I don't have a map showing the confirmed observation data. But as far as suggested survey sites, places like cemeteries, libraries, historic sites, public parks that have formal plantings, as well as private and public gardens, are prime survey areas, as many of these sites have the old large boxwood plants that would be a perfect host for the box tree moth, which Tom did show some pictures of examples of those earlier. In addition, since the box tree moth is thought to likely spread from Canada to New York, early detection efforts in the SLELO region could be focused in these types of suggested survey sites and locations along on the St. Lawrence River, perhaps, or eastern Lake Ontario. And beech leaf disease has been reported present in the SLELO region in Oswego County, and then also bordering Oneida and Herkimer counties. So this here is a screenshot of a Google map that I put together using the IMAP Invasives data to identify the confirmed observation points, which are indicated in the red circle with the star. You can see listed on the screen here. And then also I used that information to find local trails with known beech tree populations and put those also on the map for your use. So you can use that. It's an interactive map. It's right on our website, and I'm going to give you a link to it anyway with a follow-up to kind of help you assist your survey efforts for beech leaf disease. And then the elm zigzag sawfly, as you know, has been reported in the SLELO region in the St. Lawrence County. And we have a VSN story map and a Google map that shows the confirmed IMAP observations and the suggested survey sites for the sawfly. And pictured on this screen is just a close-up of the Google map. It's just easier to zoom in on that map. The suggested survey sites, they're actually located along public trails and have been confirmed to have elm stands by the St. Lawrence County DEC lands manager. And a nice feature for this map is you can click on the suggested survey site icons, and map of the trail with the GPS coordinates for the elm stands will pop up to assist your survey efforts. And we're also collaborating with local arborists and foresters and tree managers to learn of elm stands in urban areas, and we plan to add this information to the map as it's received. But in the meantime, we're just asking folks to keep an eye out for the elm zigzag sawfly in both the urban and forested settings. So in addition to assisting early detection efforts, there are just a few other volunteer opportunities that SLELO offers that you might have interest in learning about. So if you're looking for a fun and easy way to protect your favorite outdoor spaces from invasive species, now and for generations to come, you could consider taking part in our Pledge to Protect. Upon signing up, you become an official protector, and you receive a monthly email blog showcasing simple actions that you can take throughout the year to prevent the spread of invasives or to manage invasives on your own property. So in addition, you also have access to a social media toolbox and virtual toolboxes with pre-made graphics you can share, lots and lots of resources to help you learn to recognize invasives that you may encounter specifically while you're enjoying outdoor activities such as boating, hiking, gardening. And also we have lots of best management practices, guides, and apps that would be helpful for you as well. Plus you'll get chances to win prizes. And if you're looking for an excuse to get outdoors this winter, you can take our virtual hike challenge. Participating is simple. You can just take a hike, check hemlock trees for the white woolly masses of hemlock woolly adelgid, and report your observations to IMAP. And then you just share your experience on social media. And you can visit our webpage to sign up for the challenge. You can get a prize for signing up and survey tips and suggested hiking trails to visit. And lastly, volunteering is a great way to get involved. You can join removal or restoration efforts, guided paddles, hikes, and lots more. Those who volunteer with SLELO can also participate in a challenge where you can earn prizes for each level of participation that you achieve. So I highly encourage you to volunteer with us. And I wanted to give a special thank you to the New York State DEC Invasive Species Coordination Section and the New York State Environmental Protection Fund for supporting SLELO PRISM and the entire PRISM network. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll now. It's very important that if you want continuing education credits that you participate in the poll, and be sure to include all of the information, your name, your email, the continuing education credits that you're applying for, if it's SAF, SI, or ISA, and then include the required credentials for those organizations. I'm going to leave this open for a few moments here for you to go ahead and put that information in. I'll also be emailing those who fill out the form or this doodle or this poll after the webinar to confirm that I received your information. So, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Megan, it doesn't seem to be working for me. Maybe you have to click something to allow panelists. There's something that says for me, allow panelists to vote, but I don't know if it, that's good enough. Because it's not letting me type anything in the box.
All right.
But that might be specific to panelists. It might be working for other people.
Let me dig into it because I'm new to this as well. One moment.
The poll is not working. That's
Oh,
what
panelists to
other
vote.
people are saying too.
Oh, it's not working. Well, that doesn't make any sense. All right, hang on, everybody. All right, I'm gonna relaunch.
When we
this.
tried yesterday, it didn't work at first, and then you did something to make it work.
right.
I don't remember what that
I
was.
stopped sharing my screen. I forgot I was supposed to do that. So try again. Thank you for your patience.
Do I close it? Should I end it?
Oh,
Because nothing has
maybe.
changed for me, except that I have an option to end the poll.
All right, end the poll.
Okay. Well, now that option has gone away.
I'm gonna try it
Okay,
all
there
over
we go. Stop. Okay. Now it's back to the beginning and it looks the same and I cannot answer.
Hang tight with me, guys.
They cannot answer either.
Okay.
Oh, and then Rob said it worked until I stopped it. Great.
Right. 1 second. Trying to relaunch. All right. Relaunching the poll will clear existing poll results. Sure. I don't know that anybody even got them in there.
I'm not
Maria,
even.
I already have your information in there anyway. So
Okay.
oh, Rob says it's working now. So if Liam, Tom, and Maria, if you guys want the credits, you can just send me like an email with
Okay.
your credentials. But I
Okay.
already have your information added, Maria, to my spreadsheet.
Okay. And you have mine for sure with the. Okay. Awesome. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever
And
you
just
did. Yeah,
if you don't have
it's on
something,
there.
just email me.
Yeah, it's all on there.
Cool.
Okay. Not sure how to, if someone pushing buttons because it says stop sharing on the bottom now.
I closed mine. I don't know if that closed it for other people too. I won't touch anything.
Okay. All right, well, it says you're sharing the results. Okay. All right, it says that only 1 of 45 participated, so that seems a little strange. So I think what I'm gonna do is
Or just Rob.
I will email the group because I know that Robert wanted credits too, or at least I thought he did. I'll email the group and anybody who was needing the credits can just respond to me and we'll figure it out. So don't worry, we'll figure it all out. That was my first time ever doing a poll for this, so thank you for your patience. And that concludes our webinar. If anybody did want to have a little bit of open discussion with our presenters, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand and I can unmute you. Or if there's any question that our presenters thought were really good things to bring up and you wanted to elaborate more on them, feel free to go ahead and do that now. Or if there's nothing else, we will conclude our webinar today. Okay, I'm not seeing any new questions in the chat or the question area. So it looks like we can be complete for this webinar. Thank you again for joining, and I will be sending up a follow-up email by early next week, if not sooner. And don't worry about the credits. I'll make sure that whoever needs them gets them. Have a lovely day.
Thanks so much, Megan.
Thank you.
Great day.